Welcome back. Fuzzy Mud, chapters 22 through 24. Wednesday, November 3rd, 1:45 p.m. At the beginning of each school year, a parent or guardian of every student at Woodridge Academy was required to fill out a bunch of forms. Among other things, they were to provide the school with their various telephone numbers and emergency contact numbers. Those numbers were now being called grade by grade in alphabetical order. From inside her office, Mrs. Thaxton could hear Mr. Franks and Mrs. Latherley as they made one call after another. There's been an incident. Your child is perfectly safe. We're just taking extra precautions. No, we need you to personally pick up your daughter. Your babysitter's name is not in our files. If you want to fax or email your signed authorization. No decision has been made yet about tomorrow. We will be sending out a mass email. Mrs. Thaxton knew she would have been making the calls too, but she couldn't bring herself to do it. Knew she should be making the calls. She had just gotten off the phone with Tamaya's mother, who had telephoned the school after receiving Mrs. Latherley's message. No, she had not picked Tamaya up after lunch. Yes, she knew about the rash and was planning to take Tamaya to the doctor, but not until after school. What's this all about? Where's Tamaya? Mrs. Dilwadi was on her way home now. Their best hope was that Tamaya had decided to go home after lunch without telling anyone, but they also knew Tamaya wouldn't have done that. Mrs. Thaxton's chin trembled, and her eyes were blurry with tears. She blamed herself for not putting the school on lockdown the moment she'd heard that Chad Hillikus was missing. She should have done it right then. Better to overreact than underreact. But she knew the type of boy Chad was. Whatever had happened to him, wherever he was, she hadn't thought it had anything to do with the rest of the school. Not that she hadn't been concerned about him. She had been very concerned. She just hadn't taken his disappearance as a danger sign for the other students. She remembered when Chad and his mother first came to her office. His mother wrote out a check for the tuition, handed it to her, and then, right in front of Chad, declared, "He's your problem now." Tamaya was different. She was the exact opposite of Chad. She was respectful of her teachers and considerate of others. She followed the rules. She was the type of student a teacher might easily ignore, and that, Mrs. Thaxton now realized, might be why she had gone missing without anyone noticing. Mrs. Thaxton shut her eyes very tight. She knew she needed to be strong and in this time of crisis. 2 missing children in 2 days. She did not yet know that a third child would also be discovered missing. She assumed Marshall was safely back in class. Mr. Davison assumed he was still with the headmistress. No one was worried about poor Marshall. Chapter 23. Wednesday, November 3rd, 2:00 p.m. The ground was mostly soft under Tamaya's cold bare foot, but she had to step carefully to avoid the sticks and sharp rocks buried beneath the fallen leaves. Her rash had spread the full length of her arm, and she could see small red bumps on her other hand now, too. She tingled all over, although she couldn't be sure if that was because of the mud or by her own heebie-jeebies. It seemed wherever she looked, there were more mud puddles. Yet, as bad as it was for her, she knew it had been 10 times worse for Chad. At least she'd been able to go home yesterday. She'd been able to take a bath and change her clothes. "Chad!" she started to shout, then gasped and brought her hand almost to her mouth. Just ahead lay some kind of dead animal, half covered in muck and fuzz. She quickly turned her head away. It could have been a raccoon or possibly a small dog. The mud made it hard to know, and she didn't want to look. She made a wide circle around it, carefully watching every step before gently setting her foot down. She wondered if there was anybody else anywhere who knew about the fuzzy mud. She had tried to tell Miss Latherley, but the school nurse had been more worried about peanut butter. Even Marshall hadn't seemed to get it. Was it possible that she was the only one in the whole world who knew? The thought scared her, but it was also what made her keep going. If not her, who? She was determined to make it to the hills on the other side of the gully. "Chad!" she shouted. "Are you out here?" As the slope of the hill became steeper, she needed to grab onto branches to keep from losing her balance. She bounced from tree to tree, down toward the gully. There were fewer trees close to the gully, and the ground became even steeper. Tamaya could see down directly into the gully. It was more than half filled with fuzzy mud. She eased herself into a sitting position and rolled up the top of her lunch sack so nothing would spill. She slid down toward the mud, using her sneakered foot as a brake to keep from going too fast. The ground was too steep, and she started to turn sideways. She pulled at a clump of weeds to steady herself, but the weeds ripped out of the ground and she flipped over onto her stomach. Her knees scraped across jagged rocks, then her foot slammed into a large boulder, finally stopping her. She clutched another clump of weeds to try and hold herself in place as she carefully moved her other foot to the boulder for more support. Looking over her shoulder, she saw that she was only a few feet from the edge of the gully. A thin layer of fuzzy scum rose up from it, like smoke. Not too far away, she could see the flat top of the rock embedded in the dirt. It would make a good jumping off spot. It looked to be about a 6-foot jump from one side of the gully to the other. She moved, crab-like, along the slope toward the flat-topped rock. She dug her fingernails into the dirt to keep from slipping. She knew she'd have to move quickly. If she hesitated for even a half second, she could end up in the mud. She pushed herself up, spun around, and slammed her sneakered foot down on the rock. She jumped and hit the other side only inches above the mud. Using her momentum, she scrambled upward away from the gully. It wasn't until she was walking again, following a dry creek bed, that she noticed the pain from all the bruises on her hands, arms, knees, and legs. Her shirt had rolled up a bit during her slide, and she had scratches and scrapes on her stomach as well. Still, she knew her pain was nothing compared to Chad's. "Chad!" The creek bed wound its way upward between the two hills she had seen from the other side of the gully. She kept looking from one hill to the other, hoping to see Marshall's rocky ledge, although she knew that even if she found it, that didn't mean Chad was still nearby. "Chad!" Her throat was dry and her weak voice had gotten even weaker. For a second, she thought she heard something. She stopped and listened. The woods were silent. Looking back the way she had come, she wondered if she'd ever find her way out of there. She didn't want to have to cross the gully again. She heard a noise. Twigs were breaking, and then footsteps. Steps were uneven, like someone was stomping and staggering. Then she saw him. He crashed his way through a tangle of twigs and thin branches. She froze. "I'm here," he called, but his voice was little more than a raspy whisper. He took several deep, uneven breaths, then continued to push his way toward her. "I'm here," he repeated weakly. His face was a mass of blisters, crusted with pus and dried blood, and so badly swollen she could hardly see his eyes. She started to bring her hand to her mouth and then stopped herself, not wanting to get the rash on her lips or tongue. He came closer. "Where do you go?" he called from only a few feet away. He sank to his knees. "I'm right here," he whimpered. "Where do you go?" She felt overwhelmed with feelings of horror, revulsion, and pity. When she spoke softly. "Are you hungry?" More multiplication. Chapter 24. The situation in Heathcliff, 3 months later. They were flashing forward a little bit. 3 months after Tamaya found Chad in the woods, Jonathan Fitzman was subpoenaed to testify at the Heathcliff disaster hearings. Donna Jones, a lawyer from Sunray Farm, was seated by Fitzy's side. Miss Jones had instructed Jonathan Fitzman never to use the word disaster. Instead, he was to refer to it as the situation in Heathcliff. Donna Jones, Esquire. There's no evidence of any connection between Bioline and the situation in Heathcliff. That is what we were trying to determine, this is Senator Wright. About a year and a half ago, Mr. Fitzman, when you first testified before this committee, you stated that your organisms would not live in the natural environment, correct? You said the oxygen in the air would kill them. Poof. That's right. That's what I've been saying. The situation in Heathcliff, is horrible. And I feel really terrible when I think of those people, but it couldn't have been my ergies. Just to be clear, after you grow these ergonins, they are combined with other substances and made into bioline. Is that correct? There's a lot more to it than that, but I guess that's close enough. My question is this: are the ergonins in the bioline solution still alive? There's no evidence of any connection between bioline and this situation in Heathcliff. I just want to know, are the ergonins in bioline living? Yes, that's what gives them their energy. It's their vitality. And are they still reproducing every 36 minutes? No. Once they've been congealed in the bioline, there's no more cell division. Otherwise, the ratio would be all wrong. Look, you have to understand, if I thought my ergies would kill someone, I would never, ever have let them out into the world. Bioline is supposed to save mankind, not destroy it. Mr. Fitzman, please try not to wave your arms so much. You almost hit your lawyer. I'm used to it, Senator. I've learned when to duck. I know you said you have all kinds of safety precautions, but just suppose, Mr. Fitzman, just suppose that some bioline is spilled. I presume most of the liquid would then evaporate. Yes, and the ergies would disintegrate. But if they didn't die, would these now free ergonins be able to start reproducing again? I don't know. Maybe if they were still alive, but by the time all the liquid evaporated, the air would have already killed them. Any car that runs on bioline has to be equipped with a vacuum fuel injection system. I'm now working on a way to make sure the fuel tanks remain warm in the winter, even if the engine is turned off and the car is parked outside in the ice and snow. You testified last year that an ergonin engages in cell division every 36 minutes. Yes, until they've been congealed in bioline. With trillions upon trillions of cells dividing all the time, aren't there ever mutations? There is no evidence of any connection between bioline and the situation in Heathcliff. You have to understand, mutations are bound to happen, but that's no reason for everybody to get all freaked out. Normally, when cell division occurs, the new organism is an exact copy of the original. But when there's a mutation, that just means there's a defect of some kind. For whatever reason, the copy isn't exact. The defective organism usually cannot survive, and that's the end of it. The rest of the ergies go on doing what they've been doing. But is it possible that an ergonin could have mutated in a way that made it capable of surviving in oxygen? The odds of that happening are like 1,000,000,000 to 1. 1,000,000,000 to 1. Okay, last time you were here, you testified that there are more than a quadrillion ergonins in a gallon of bioline. So quadrillion divided by 1,000,000,000 equals 1,000. At 1,000,000,000 to 1 odds, that would mean in every gallon of bioline, there are 1,000 ergonins that can live in the natural environment. No, that's not right. I'd already factored in the number of mutations when I said the odds were 1,000,000,000 to 1. You're double multiplying. Let's suppose someone spills a few drops of bioline and all the normal ergonins instantly go poof. But there might be one mutated ergonin that survives. Then 36 minutes later, it will make an exact copy of itself. We'll have 2 ergies, both capable of living in oxygen. And 36 minutes after that, 4. And after just 1 day, there'd be more than 1 billion of these oxygen-surviving ergonins. And 36 minutes after that, 1 billion more. This is pure speculation. I think we can all agree that there has been no conclusive evidence of any connection between bioline and the situation in Heathcliff. What led you to the conclusion that you needed to keep the fuel tanks warm in winter? Mr. Fitzman simply wants to be sure that the people who drive bioline-powered cars don't have any difficulties. You have to understand, I never wanted to hurt anyone. Unfortunately, a lot of people were hurt. All right.